Hey, what's going on guys, Khraze here and welcome back to another day in Marvel's Avengers. Today, let's take a look at all of the elemental damage types that are available in this game. The reason you're going to want to pay attention to these is because they heavily influence your build and they are some of the most powerful perks that you will definitely need in the end game. So let's jump right into it. If you enjoyed this video at any point, a like on it would be super appreciated and let's get to it. Nonetheless, there are 6 types of elementals that you can get in this game on your gear. This includes cosmic damage, pim particles, gamma radiation, plasma burn, frost, and finally shock damage. It's going to be very important on what type of perks you will find these elementals onto, because you can find them on pretty much everything. This includes anything from pistol shots, power attacks, combo finishers, enemy grabs, dodges, you name it, but it's going to be the best if you find these on instantaneous types of attacks, for example like pistol shots or power attacks. Elementals are going to be indicated with a small little bar and icon at the top of the enemy health, and once that small bar over there is fully filled, the elemental effect is going to be fully applied to that particular target. Multiple elements, by the way, can be applied to the same target, and in the game so far we were able to notice 4 at the same time on the same target. But let's begin with the cosmic elemental. If an enemy takes enough cosmic damage, they become ionized, which results in them taking even more damage while also boosting your hero's willpower. So you will see that all of your attacks on that target will deal more damage, which is noticeable from that really awesome effect with the yellow sparks that start surrounding your attacks. It makes you heal up on each subsequent attack, and most important, it also boosts up your intrinsic power. And this is going to be an amazing perk for somebody like Black Widow, which in the early stages of the game doesn't have that many easy options to build up that intrinsic power like how other characters might do it. Like if you can find an item that will buff up your pistol attacks with that cosmic damage, it's going to be probably one of the best perks you can get on her, since it truly enables your range capabilities. So in the end game, it's very likely that this is going to be one of the more important elementals, since it does heal you on each subsequent hit, and this might be very useful on the higher difficulties and against bosses where you will want to constantly keep your HP up. The second one on the list is going to be the pim particles, and also some of my favorites in the game. You can notice these since they have that very distinctive pink-red outline, but also because of their very particular effect. So basically, pim particles will cause the enemies to shrink, which in turn also causes all of their attacks to deal less damage, and also it's going to reduce their defenses, and in the process they will become much weaker. By far the best characters to make use of this are Iron Man as well as Hulk, especially Iron Man with those laser upgrades, because you can basically concentrate that beam onto a target, and if you have a perk that affects your beam attacks, you are going to be able to apply that really easily to any target and shrink pretty much anything that you might be focusing on. But it also works really well on somebody like Hulk, especially when combining it with that Tectonic Fury ability. Normally that ability can easily be interrupted, but if you also spread these particles, you can interrupt those enemies when you shrink them, which means that you have more room to open up those attacks and spread all of that damage to all of the enemies nearby. And I would also argue that this is what truly enables that build altogether. But by far the most unexpected effect is the fact that on various of these enemies which are normally ungrabbable, like for example these ones, it makes them so that with a character like Hulk, for example, they can be grabbed, which definitely opens them up to even more damage, but even more so, it turns them into your very own targets that you can use against other enemies. So pretty good one, which would go really well with a debuff kind of build in the end game. Moving on to number 3 though, this is the time to go over the gamma radiation, also represented by the color green. The way this works is you apply a poison effect, damage over time, on a target that spreads it to nearby targets, and it also makes them explode if they happen to die under that effect. And you will see that the primary target is affected by the big dot damage, meanwhile the ones surrounding it will get the smaller number, but in the process this also builds up that gamma radiation effect on them and it spreads it around quite a bit. So this means that if you get a proper build, you can spread this to multiple enemies at the same time, at which point you will start seeing a ton of dots jumping in, dealing a ton of damage to multiple enemies at the same time in a proximity, while also spreading that gamma radiation effect onto those targets and building that effect effect up onto them, which actually sounds really awesome. I think that this opens up the possibility of creating dot builds into the endgame, which do sound really interesting. I do want to see how these look like into the maximum level, but even early on they do seem quite important since they do seem to pass shields completely. So unlike pretty much every other elemental out there, you don't need to wait to take down the enemy's shields to see the effect happening. And by the way, it also seems to affect and scale up with your current stats, and this means that in the end game and at the maximum level, the damage is going to be much higher than what you're seeing right now on the screen. This brings us to number 4, which is all about that plasma damage. So if an enemy takes enough plasma damage, they will get affected by a plasma burn, which in turn causes their attacks to be randomly interrupted, and some of them will also get more easily staggered. You will see if an enemy is affected by the plasma burn if you also start seeing these smaller explosions appearing when you deal damage on the target, especially when you shoot bullets and other types of range abilities. Now, compared to other elemental types, this might feel a little bit more unreliable, especially on the fact that it only randomly interrupts those enemy attacks. So in theory, yes, it should reduce the incoming damage since enemies do get interrupted, but on the other hand, this could also be a little bit too unreliable. The one that is a bit more reliable on it is that effect with the additional stagger that can be applied to other types of enemies. So yes, this should make it much easier for you to stagger even enemies like the adaptoids, which are pretty annoying on the brutal difficulty. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any additional damage on top like how it was with the previous ones, which also isn't going to impact your DPS too much, but I guess there is a trade-off to that too. This brings us to number 5, which is going to be that frost damage that I was talking about. So frost damage does a couple of things. As you would expect, it slows down your enemy's movements as well as the frequency of their attacks, while also disabling many of their defensive capabilities completely. Just like in the case of that gamma radiation effect, this also seems to affect enemies even if they are under that shield effect, so you don't have to wait for you to break it down before the effect happens onto the target. And it's actually quite a powerful one, even though it doesn't seem to provide any additional damage, because it severely slows down everything that the enemy might be doing. This doesn't just include those enemy movements and turns and attacks and the frequency of attacks, but also the way they jump and they fall, especially on that fall, which seems to be most heavily reduced. Like, it's really funny to see a frozen up enemy falling at a heavily reduced speed, but this also opens them up to way more attacks, it makes them way more vulnerable, and it heavily increases the time they need to recover and attack you back. So it's very likely that this is going to be a very important one in the endgame too, but I kind of fear that it doesn't affect many of the bosses or the bigger enemies in the game. Like, I definitely didn't see any of these effects to be applied onto the dread bots, for example, which I really wanted because it would have helped tremendously. Nonetheless, this brings us to the 6th and final one on the list, which is that shock damage, which you can see right here on some of these gear pieces. But what this does is it makes your enemies become shocked when you fully apply that and increase the bar, and this is also going to increase the damage that they will receive from your attacks, while also increasing the critical chance that you will have against them. So basically, if you want to create a critical chance build, the shock damage is going to be the best for that, because it's going to let you crit way more often if the enemy is under that shock effect. And it also seems that it's quite a powerful effect because it increases that damage even on your regular hits. So if you go up against enemies, you can deal more damage, your crit chance is more increased, and you're going to be able to clear everything much faster. Again, I cannot fully confirm if this is going to work on enemy bosses too. It seems that sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but it's still quite a powerful effect that you might want to have on some of your gear, especially for enemies that might have something like a melee build that only focuses on close quarter combat. Let me know though in the comment section down below which one of these is your favorite and what type of elemental are you planning to use the most in the endgame. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I hope that this video proved useful to you guys, and if it did, definitely let me know by leaving a like on this video. Also consider subscribing and activating the notification bell to get these videos as early as possible, and I will see you guys in the next one.